Hi, everyone. As you can see, once more, we're here to do an interview. I'm very excited to be being joined by Brandon Montclare, who is currently going to be doing DuckTales. But you may know him from some other things. You may have seen Rocket Girl. You may know that he co-created Moon Girl or read some Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, maybe Batman Legends. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm thrilled that he's able to join me today and talk about all of it. Hello.
Hey, I'm excited to talk and be here. So thank you for the invite.
No, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day. And DuckTales, it's quite the fun assignment. What's it like to get to dive into such an all ages kind of concept?
It's been a lot of fun, as you would expect. I'm old enough to remember the original cartoon, and I was a fan of it, but, it was the 80s, so there's everything on those to be a fan of. But looking back, it holds up a lot better than some of the other stuff, as much as I have a soft spot for He-Man and G.I. Joe and all that other things. But it's been a lot of fun to work on DuckTales. And also, growing up, and it's older than me, obviously, but just the history of Uncle Scrooge with Carl Parks and Don Rosa and everybody else who's worked on it. To me, it's very much an Uncle Scrooge book. It's an honor to be working on it as much as it's fun. So, and I take all ages to be very much all ages, not just kid stuff. I like to kind of write across so everyone can get a little bit of something out of it, like I did with Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. So that's certainly the intent with the first issue. I hope it comes across.
What do you find is the secret to doing that, to adding those elements for everybody?
Yeah, to me, it's obviously it's the layers of humor that you can do. And it's not like it hasn't been done before. I cite the Warner Brothers stuff, like, the old Bugs Bunny cartoons is always funny, or Simpsons, which is a little bit more scripted and story based, or even SpongeBob SquarePants. It's which is a little after my time. It's all good stuff that you can do, and you have to also not appeal to the parents. I think a lot of the kids stuff appeals to the parents who buy books for their kids. So you have to get things that are going to make kids excited, and you always have to be a little bit. You have to have a little bit of drama, a little bit of disobeying of the rules, a little bit of parents are bad guys, and it's and then with the interplay, with Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, it was really a Moon Girl story, and you had kind of Devil Dinosaur for her to bounce off of, and all the Marvel universe. So it's very much a superhero book. But with DuckTales, you have really, obviously they're all ducks, but it's more of a straightforward, except for all the obviously adventures and mystery. It's more of a straightforward relationship. So you have Huey, Dewey, and Louie kind of looking up to Uncle Scrooge, how he would be the kind of uncle that anybody wishes they had. And then as much as he has a gruff and stony, exterior sometimes, that it gets to him that he's the object of all this affection. So, like I said, just the interplay between the characters, and then is kind of generally to do it. But to make it good, you have to kind of hit the right notes of humor, which is always not taking yourself too seriously, whether you're thinking back as being a 10-year-old or being a 10-year-old and as an adult. That, we're all just trying to get along in the world, I think. So that's
When it comes to adding those layers of humor to it, what is that process like when you're transcribing it from the more kind of, I don't want to say zany, because I wouldn't say DuckTales were zany, but you know what I mean? That dynamic kind of kinetic flow. How do you make that come across in the writing?
Yeah, I know what you mean, like kind of that zany and the wackiness stuff. It's not kind of my personal taste for things, right? It's a little like it could be a little too broad when you do that. So it's really a craft, unlike it's not really, I think, any different than horror or action or superhero stuff. I worked at Vertigo as an editor for a little bit, and in the Bat Office for a little bit before that. So I've been a fan my whole life. And when I was a little kid, I'd seek out the Ninja Turtles that were before the Pizza and Cowabunga ones, right? When they were killing the ninjas in the sewers, and Wolverine and Punisher. That's all kind of my stuff. So, to kind of construct, it's just a writing process. I'm pretty much a formalist when it comes to writing. Very structured. I think everything is, I deal with in basically beginning, middles, and ends is what I tell people with the writing. I teach sometimes, not too much. But anything from little kids when I go to visit to college age, and, just kind of think of everything as a structure of, beginning where you're setting something up, and then the conflict is the middle, and then the payoff is the end. But the end should also be a new beginning, right? So it's maybe sounds like I'm kind of dodging your question. How do you do the layers of humor? But it's the same way you do layers in anything. you know, you just kind of construct it. You think of other things you've read or watched or experienced, and try to put it into a thing of what, you know, what does it mean? Why are we talking about this? And how is it going to be resolved? And then after that resolution, kind of new status quo you're going to begin with. And that's, you know, I don't know if that's like I said, I don't know if that's to me, just as far as process goes. Yeah, I'm pretty much, you know, everyone says, well, they write or rewrite, but I give a pretty detailed script, but it's detailed in as far as like motivations and you know, kind of you know, why characters are thinking, what they're thinking and why they're doing something, as opposed to positioning people on a page. So you have to rely on the artist, and you have to have the right kind of artist who can kind of get who can make small moments look good, you know. So sometimes if someone's just too used to like the big action of a superhero book, they might not be the best person to kind of, you need the kind of moments where you slow it down a little bit and you kind of go for an emotional reaction.
Do you find that process is altered in any way by the fact that this is, they keep saying in all of the press releases and the lead up that I've seen, that it is in continuity with the classic cartoon? So does that factor into how you're writing it?
Yeah, continuity, like plot wise, it's in '87, so that kind of speaks for itself. But you also want it, of course, to match up. You want it to feel like the old cartoon, and that's not something that those kind of parameters are, to me, interesting. It makes the creative process actually have some kind of path and some kind of developing structure to it. You know, I've been lucky enough to do Rocket Girl, where it's a creator-owned thing, or co-create Moon Girl. Even though it's in a shared Marvel universe, it's still kind of something where I got to set the voice. The reason that DuckTales was a big success, and Uncle Scrooge a huge success before that, and still, especially overseas in Europe and different places, is just because it's they're great characters with great voices that work, and you just kind of don't try to overdo it, and I don't try to put my own spin on it, you know. And not that it's not cool to reinvent things. I did a lot to change Devil Dinosaur, you know, not just by adding Moon Girl, but Devil Dinosaur, a character that isn't just in dinosaur world eating cavemen all day long fighting other dinosaurs.
Breaking off of that, what is it that you feel makes a good character?
Well, a character has to be something that, you know, it's a concept, that something that people can be, it has to be in a way a touchstone, right? It's something that people instantly recognize. Why? So that's why cliches you shouldn't always shy away from as a writer. Obviously, you don't want to be boring, but you know, it just goes back to the old cowboy movies where the bad guy had a black hat. You know what I mean? Or Darth Vader. When you see him appear, you know that he's bad news, right? But you're talking about what makes a character a good character. Again, kind of the familiarity and the what you can kind of instantly recognize certain things. So that he takes joy in the kind of riches of life, and it tells you so much, right? Not just that he's a miser and he likes money, and that, but how did he get all this stuff, and what's the you know, what's the origin of his fabulous treasure? And with somebody with that much, they only want to keep adding to it and adding to it and adding to it. So these characters, when they work, they kind of, like I said, they have an integrity where, when, you know, they answer a good question. A good character is somebody that not only like provokes a question, but also gives you the answer right away, if that makes any sense. So you take even like Batman, let's say, something so iconic. You know, he's compelled to not just fight crime and stop bank robbers like any superhero can do, but that he's kind of motivated by himself being afraid when he was a little kid. So he wants to strike fear into the hearts of evildoers, so to speak, a shadow type of character, shadow like the old pulp character.
You were discussing what makes a good character and how for some of them you don't need to alter too much, because as you were saying, like, if they're not broken, why, you know, try and fix it? Do you feel that comes in any way from having worked as an editor?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, you know, as a fan also, I think any reader can kind of relate to it. But, you know, they used to talk about in editorial at DC and other places too, you know, the illusion of change, that you got to, you know, as much as you want to have a big story arc or a big, you know, reveal of a character's past or anything else like this, you always have to kind of return them to where they were, because the next guy is going to have to do it, right? And meaning the next writers and artists, the next creative team. So yeah, there's very much that place. Certainly with continuity, you know, with when you work on a brand like Batman, and I was in the Bat office for a while, some of that is really just brand management where, okay, well, obviously you have to have all of the books go together. Even if you're not doing like a kind of an event, you still don't want you don't want to be something so radically different from what's happening in Detective versus what's happening in Batman. And just the kind of ground rules for that is to say, all right, well, don't do anything too outrageous with Batman. And then people come along and try to do something, and some of it sticks and some of it's thrown away, and you go back to what it was at. And it's kind of the, the trick to it. But I think very much so, yeah, working editorial, it's driven home every day, especially on a book like Batman, because it is so important for it to be iconic. But obviously the Batman of 2024 is different than the one from 1939, right? So, people change it every once in a while, and that tends to stick. But you learn a lot from working on Batman. As much as you think he's a one-dimensional character, there's so many obviously great writers, and so you look at Frank Miller and such an iconic take on it, and how much he redefined the character, they'll say, right? So, well, he brought back the grim and gritty Batman that because maybe people were thinking of it more like the 20 years before Frank was doing it, the 1966 cartoon, and then Super Friends and Lunchboxes. And he made it, a little darker and a little bit more serious. And you see that today in everybody's stuff, but certainly Scott Snyder's. But at the same time, I think Frank's stuff is hilarious. Like I don't think you can read Dark Knight Returns and not kind of laugh. And you certainly can't read Dark Knight Strikes Again, which may be some people's controversial. But I love Dark Knight Strikes Again. I think it's a great book because there's such a joy in it. And there's such a kind of this, dark humor at times and other things, and just a cool factor that I think guys like Frank Miller and, look at Garth Ennis, all his Punisher and all his Preacher. I remember when I was working at Vertigo and I had a pitch, and Karen thought it was a little bit too funny, Karen Berger, the editor-in-chief. And she goes, "Oh, we don't really do humor at Vertigo." I said, "You don't do humor?" I read however many, was it 60 issues of Preacher? That book's hilarious. You know what I mean? So, something about, humorless books never really have done it for me. Like I said, I don't want to kind of name names, but with somebody like Mark Waid, who's done great stuff in Flash and Fantastic Four. I like that stuff by him better, more than I like Kingdom Come, as much as Kingdom Come is hugely popular. And I wish I had half the fan base of Mark Waid. But to me, Kingdom Come is kind of joyless, and humorless. And as much as it's a love letter to comics, it doesn't make me feel like a kid reading comics, which is not the intent, you know what I mean? But and again, maybe that's just personal taste. But if you're talking about kind of my process, yeah, a lot of that influence is trying to bring in a funny angle to it.
Is that one of the appealing parts of working on DuckTales?
Yeah, 100%, because that's obviously very broad right in a way. You have some, you have wild action, and you can kind of have that kind of Warner Brothers cartoony violence of people getting fought and stuff like that. And at a certain time you could kind of shy away, and maybe the 2017 DuckTales shied away from it being so much about money and so much about it. It didn't 100%, which was good. But trying to say, so much about Scrooge's greed and his short temper and everything else. It's like, no, it's fun to be able to go back to the flawed character, because flaw is always what makes it interesting. And Scrooge, it can be very flawed, right? Because all he cares about is money. So if you ever have that kind of take over his brain for an issue or a scene or a moment, it gives you, like I said, it gives you something that you can later call him out on. The reader can call out him as a character, and I think everyone relates to kind of not taking yourself too seriously. So I think a book as fun as I want to make DuckTales, as Indiana Jones as I want to make DuckTales, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you could do where you can say, well, Scrooge can be angry, or he can, be competitive, or he can do all those other things. But, if you look in the mirror, maybe he's his own worst enemy. That was definitely Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. So you'd say, okay, she's the smartest character in the Marvel universe. She became, over the course that was kind of revealed that she was smarter than Reed Richards and Dr. Doom, everyone else. But the trick to me for writing that for 47 issues was kind of always the question, why does the smartest girl in the world keep making really dumb decisions, and why does a lot of times you have Devil Dinosaur, who might be the dumbest character in the Marvel universe, right? And why is he sometimes more successful or wiser in ways that you can kind of play off. And yeah, it's just a kind of contrast. So anything with extremes, if you take it at face value, there's only so much you can do with it, and it can get boring. And you know, I think you can have Punisher continually shoot people with an Uzi in the face. You know what I mean? And maybe, or you have like a Judge Dredd, right? You know, maybe that's why Garth Ennis did so well on Punisher, because maybe you can't just continually hit somebody, or like a character like Lobo, right? You can continually do that shotgun to the face, but to me, you have to, like I said, you have to call that character out on it for it to be kind of not just humorous in a laugh out loud type of way, but also a kind of gives a sweetness to it, because there's a vulnerability to Scrooge when he lets his greed when he doesn't realize that the best things in life are free is kind of is the counterpoint that you want to hit with Scrooge, every once in a while to keep him honest and keep the reader engaged. I think
when you're working with an IP like this and it has all that history and all of those things that you're working through, do they work really closely with you to make sure that the structure and tone is maintained? Are there ever moments where they're like, no, you can't do that, or this would be too far, or like he has to be like this?
Yeah, some are practical, like they're just like, oh, you can't do this and it seems like there's no reason, but they have their reasons. I will say though, at the start, Nate Cosby's the editor on the book, and it's really his job to interface with Disney people. And I don't know, having been somewhat in that position a few times, because I've just been around long enough and did a lot of things. There's probably a lot of stuff that he shields me from that I don't even know. And a good editor is always somebody who you make. I wasn't a very hands-on editor. Not that I was always the junior man, but I worked on a lot of good books. I worked on like All-Star Superman and All-Star Batman with Bob Schreck, and Paul Pope's Batman Year 100, and Sweet Tooth with Jeff Lemire, and Day Tripper at Vertigo, and a lot of really good books. The trick to an editor, if something's not working, it really is to get the writer or the artist to fix it. Like it's not like, okay, this scene or this dialogue or this depiction of the character in the art isn't working, and change it by doing X, Y, and Z. It's in a way an eeasy job, because you just have to kind of say, well, this isn't working. What do you think could make it better? Saying by you in that sentence, I mean the creator that you're talking to. I think in a lot of ways, any editor, and I'm sure Nate, filters some stuff from Disney and then has a conversation with me about it and makes it think that it was my idea to make a change, or to go in this direction, or to be a little bit less emphasis here and a little bit more emphasis there. But Disney is also a strict taskmaster. I don't know from firsthand experience, but just from people who deal with them often, including Nate, who never says any of this. But I mean that I'm not just covering for him. He plays it 100% square. Disney has its rules and it has its properties. When I first was doing DuckTales, I thought I would have to bring in some of the elements from 2017, which I wasn't I just wasn't a fan because I didn't grow up with it. You know what I mean? So I was like, oh, should I read that stuff? What do they do that's cool? I hope I don't have to do this. I hope I don't have to do that. And they say, no, absolutely. Do not. They call it siloing.
Okay.
Where it's like, don't do anything from 2017. Even like Darkwing Duck that he originated in DuckTales. They said, don't use Darkwing Duck at all. He's his own property now. He does his own thing. And even to me, I would like to put him as a fictional character. Like I'd like Huey, Dewey, and Louie to be reading Darkwing Duck comics. But like, no, don't even like that's technically okay. But like, no, don't even go there. And then there is some stuff where it's a little bit too, maybe my humor got a little too biting. Or come across as a little too mean. Like, we're like, oh no, he wouldn't say that. That's too much. And then, so they keep you honest, which is fine. I mean, it's, again, I feel that I'm at the service to Dynamite, the publisher, and Disney, the licensor. And, I don't want to make their life any more trouble than I already do with a late deadline or my own silly things. So I play by the rules. There is an old Jim Steranko trick, and I've used it once. I knew they wouldn't allow. There's a scene of like, I probably shouldn't say this, but hopefully no one listen. I won't say which scene it was, but there was a lot of times there was like a montage, right? So you kind of go through things, and it's kind of about Duckburg. So there was a scene where they're walking through Duckburg, and it's like just quick cuts of like all the different locations you can go to. And there's a location I knew that they wouldn't let me put in, but there's a couple that I thought maybe they wouldn't let me put in. So I said, well, if I put the bad one in, they're going to point that one out and say, no, just change it. And maybe they'll kind of like let the other ones pass. I want to give it a bit of an edge. Like I said, a subversive edge, not anything bad. No hidden message. It's inappropriate. Just the tone that I was going for. And lo and behold, they said, no, just change it. You absolutely can't do that. I said, oh, okay. So then I changed it. So it's politics, but not in a 2024 very contentious, angry political way. But everyone's just doing their job too. So I don't certainly take it personally, and I'm sure they don't, because they have to. That is their job. They do it all day.
What would you say is the most fun part then of getting to work on a property like this?
Well, it's hopefully it'll be the reaction of readers. That's why anybody does all these things. And it's one thing to put out a new character, which I pretty much did with Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, and definitely did with Rocket Girl, which were my two major works. And I did put a lot of new stuff out as an editor, but you're not connected to it the same way. So there's something in this. DuckTales is a really good property because so many people remember it, and everyone's kind of familiar with at least Donald Duck and Disney Ducks and all that other stuff. If you're a little kid, you know what I mean? And certainly if you're my age and reading it with your kids, or reading it just because you love DuckTales. Or maybe you're a huge hardcore Carl Barks fan, and there's a lot of kind of echoes of his stuff intentionally in our book too. What I hope will be the best part is people reading it, and liking it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's kind of why I do it, for the audience reaction. We all just if you kind of break down what creators do, it's making the reader believe in something that isn't real. It's complete. It's like a magician on stage in a sense. It's just lines on paper and words put in a certain order. But if you can get people to care about it, there's something thrilling about that. And just as far as the day to day, and this is a common answer, it's seeing the art come in is the best part when you're working on a character, especially when it's an iconic character, because you have all the history in your head, whether it's the history of little Brandon watching DuckTales or appreciation of how big Disney is and how big Scrooge is, to see it, you're only sending off a script for the artist to do all the hard work, and for that to come back and look amazing, which it always has with Tommaso Randa, the artist, who I've never gotten to meet or speak with much yet, because again, it's filtered through the editor, and it's an Italian studio that does a lot of the art. So hopefully as the book comes out, I'll have more interaction with them. But, Tommaso gives me everything I asked for and more, and makes it better too. And it's just so great to see those pages.
Because you said that you were a fan of it growing up, did you ever get to implement any of the ideas that you had? Like, did you ever have any stories you wanted to tell? And now that you're here in this position, you're like, now is the time?
Yeah, that I should, but no. And no one ever asked me that question. It's a very good question. And somehow I had the answer right in my head already. There's something very much about, I'm going to go, my usual long, I'm going to make a short answer long. There's something about being a kid, especially, and growing up with not just the cartoons, but like action figures and toys and stuff like that, that I think I'm old enough that, I remember, Empire Strikes Back. I don't remember anything except that Han Solo, who was my favorite character because I had the action figure. I don't know why else it would be, because I was a toddler. He was, in my mind, dead, right? And then an older kid on my block, said, "Oh no, the first thing that they do in the next movie is they're going to rescue Han Solo," which makes sense because that's how the Empire ended. But I barely could comprehend it at the time, right? So I remember thinking, "Oh yeah, that's going to be good," and then I waited for whatever the difference between that kid telling me and the movie came out, which was at least 2 years. You know what I mean? For that to happen. So I think, but with the action figures in my hand, or if I read comic books, all the adventures that you could go on that they didn't do, like everything that you would do as a little kid, I read that, wouldn't it be cool if this character did that or the other character did this? And man, if I ever got to do it, I would change this, that, or the other thing. That makes total sense, because I think it's almost like a very Grant Morrison idea of putting cool little nuggets in there that don't necessarily relate to the story, but give you a sense of the world. And it gives, like, in my mind, a little kid can go off and kind of play in those things. If you read All-Star Superman, there's plenty of things to remember. But there were like the dinosaurs who lived in like under the earth, like heated by the sun because they escaped the ice age by going in. There's kind of these dinosaur humanoids that are only for a couple of pages. But I remember editing that book and that scene and saying, wow, if I was a little kid, I would just spend all day thinking about those dinosaurs and what they could do. And you could do a whole comic book about that. It'd be great. And I'd have that comic book in my mind. It was action figures. I'd be redoing that scenario as a little kid. But all that being said, it makes total sense. But I'm too much of, like I said, I break things down too much. I kind of, I'm like I said, a formalist, or story structure is too important. That to me, the ideas are really easy for me. It's and maybe that's why I kind of discount them a bit. Like, oh, wouldn't this be a cool idea? I can come up with 50 cool ideas. That's not the problem. Problem is the execution of making that cool idea into a story that people will enjoy. So that being said, yeah, I never said, oh, wow, I finally get to go in this direction that I've been waiting for ever since. Look, yeah, that just doesn't enter my mind. It should, for all the reasons I spent a long time talking about, but it just doesn't. So sorry to say.
You mentioned earlier something that I thought was really interesting, which is the fact that as the writer and as the editor, your relationship with the work is different. Does it alter the feeling you have towards the work, I guess is my question?
Oh, yeah, 100%. You really can't. It's funny because I did a little bit of writing before I worked at DC Comics. I worked for Tokyo Pop, was my first job in publishing. And Tokyo Pop was, they did licensed manga, so they translated stuff and basically put out translations. But at the time, they were putting out original manga in English, like with American creators in the manga style, right? So putting out new material. And that's the stuff I got to work on just as an intern and then as an employee for a little bit. It was the Wild West, and it was a lot of fun. So, and I got to do some writing there for like, oh, this artist is good, but they can't write, and give them a sample. So we would do a backup story in one of our licensed manga that might be 4 pages or 8 pages. And I don't even think I got paid for some of those things that I wrote. And then I wrote a couple of other things. But somehow it didn't, maybe because it was just, I was so young and so bad at it, that I didn't think about it. But as an editor, I would hear people talk about, oh, it's so upsetting when you get fired off of a book, it's no good. You know what I mean? Or not even fired. It's just, nobody lasts on anything, forever. But, even simple things like, the character, like, when the next creative team doesn't do what you did, or doesn't think what you thought was important, like you did. You can it's not that you take it personally, but you do feel it, you know what I mean? So it's, as an editor, I always said, I would never be that way. I'm not terribly that way. It's not like, the Moon Girl cartoon is so different that it upsets me. There's a lot that I like about it, and I am kind of at peace with it. And that's the wrong word, because that almost makes it sound negative. I really enjoy it. I designed Moon Girl to be a character that works in the Marvel universe, and for me, that means multiple creators over the now it's been years. It'll be 10 years actually next year, but over the years and the decades and the dozens of creators and then hundreds of creators and the tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands of readers or the millions of people who will watch an MCU movie. Everyone's going to have, it's got to be a character that works for everybody. It's got to be something that another creator can put her in the Avengers. Or, like I always like to say, there's a big Marvel Universe poster, speaking of Alex Ross again, and he did the art, and there's Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And I love that she was a part of that. And you can't get that unless you let go. And, not that I have control over the character anyway, but you can't do that unless another creator is inspired to work with your character. You take that as flattery. But that being said, you do tend to be a little bit more emotional about these things that as an editor, I was more dispassionate about and kind of rolled my eyes. But, if I ever did more editing, I think I would be much more sensitive to how much of yourself goes into creation, even if it's something that's totally unlike you. Just the process of doing it, right? The process of trying to do something for an audience that they're going to appreciate. I don't even mean to couch it in negative terms as for what things change or whatnot, because you have the benefit also. It's a lot more satisfying, and rightfully so. This I did anticipate. When you're the writer on a book, it's a lot better than being the assistant editor on a book, right? You have a lot more, when it's a success, when people like it. because it's like, oh, wow. Like I deserve 0% of the credit for All-Star Superman and never had any illusions otherwise. Right. But that being said, now that I do a book like Girl and Devil Dinosaur, and hopefully DuckTales will be a big hit too. It's like, oh no, I did that, and I was a huge part of it. And when people come up to you at a convention and say they love All-Star Superman or they love Batman Year 100, says, yeah, I love it too. I was just basically a fan on that book. Versus when they might say it on Moon Girl or Rocket Girl or hopefully DuckTales. You really do take that in a much more, I guess that makes sense, in a much more heartfelt way.
What parts of yourself did you put into DuckTales?
It's just the craft. I don't put anything that's like my ideas or my, DuckTales is very easily a book that you could make moralistic. And I don't mean that in like some kind of negative, harsh, didactic way, but in a sense that kind of, beware, Edgar Allan Poe, he said, beware the heresy of the didactic, meaning stories that have to have a moral or a meaning. So I don't put any of my ideas, I consciously don't do that. And I don't take necessarily things that happen in my life and put them in the books. Because to me, it's not the fun of being an artist. Art being artifice, right? Being a trick, so what I put into it is the craft and my skills. And other people are different, and other people are super successful being a little bit biographical, you know what I mean? Or just experiential. To me, I like totally the illusionism of it, if that makes any sense, where it's like I take pride in having crafted something that made people happy. Because I was a little kid, and I don't think you respond to Star Wars or Spider-Man comic books, or I was a big Gru fan, or Conan the Barbarian, which is the exact opposite of Gru, stuff like that. I remember those books being so important to me, and I don't think I remember, people who kind of identify as a Jedi now or something like that. And there's good philosophy. There's a good structure to it, and I can kind of see that now as an adult and appreciate it. But back then, it was just about being kind of dazzled by all the different variations of soldiers that are in GI Joe, and everyone had a special. You change the gun a little bit, you change the costume a little bit. You look at the back, and Larry Hama wrote all those. These are the weapons they use and the tactics and the kind of cataloging of it. In a lot of ways, that's the Marvel universe or the DC universe, also, right? Just all of these little things that you do to build a world that's so important to a little kid is kind of what I go for. And I think that if it was too much about, first of all, it'd be boring. Like I don't, as much as I can talk and talk and talk, and I can talk and talk and talk about me. It's not really about what I think about life or what I think, about what how the world should be or anything like that. It's just So to me, it's all about just the craftsmanship. I hope and it's not all, but it's more largely that than maybe the average comics writer.
So when it comes to the way you've crafted it,
but,
no, it does make sense, because there are really different ways to approach things, and some approach it more from that experience standpoint, like you were saying. But then there's also the art to trying to create something that is not of one's own experience, and they're different, And when it comes to something like this DuckTales work, because you said you're more formulaic, so have you laid it out in a more episodic fashion, in a more serialized form? Like, how far ahead have you plotted it? Like, how's it going to go?
It's an ongoing series, and kind of the first 12 issues are approved, so to speak, in the sense that we're going to do 12, and hopefully we'll do 112. You know what I mean? But very consciously, the first 5 issues is like one arc that's going to be collected together, and it takes place in Duckburg, because Scrooge is so well known for going to foreign lands to find, exotic locations to find treasure, but also the cartoon had like no barrier. It could be in outer space. It could be traveling through time. You could have giant robots right next to an Indiana Jones temple, and sometimes even in the same episode. So Duckburg, I said, the idea being the kind of cliche that a good location is a part of the story. Like Gotham is a character in Batman. You know what I mean? I want Duckburg to be a character. And since Scrooge built it all, he can kind of go through it and bring his nephews and say, you don't, because his nephews always want to hear about, like, where'd you get this treasure and how did you beat this monster to win the day? And they're kind of thinking these grand terms. But the idea being that Scrooge says, and by extension, the reader, you can go walk right outside and there's a story behind everything, right? There's a story behind the library that was built, and there's a story behind the movie theater, and there's a story behind, the schoolyard and everything else. And these characters that you see, these people that you see are all kind of characters that you could embrace. And that's what we did with the first 5 issues. But I will say, keeping it true to this kind of the more out there, literally out there things, that each issue has 1 or 2 flashbacks to Scrooge. Either he's on the Klondike digging for gold, or he's in some kind of foreign location, in a battle of wits against Magica Dispel and stuff like that. So those first 5 go together as a kind of standalone unit, and then right after that, and there's also focus on mostly on Scrooge, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and not the supporting characters. And then the 6th issue, and it's going to be one of 2 things. And that's just scheduling. But either way, it's going to be a big extravaganza with all the characters and everything else. And it's going to make up for it. And then, the idea is, do we want to do more arcs after that, or keep it to single issues? And it might change, but right now I'm leaning towards single issues. It's the publisher side of my brain, not that it's my decision to make, so it's easier for me to say, that kids tend to, at least this is what people who work in that business say, they like standalone big stories more than single episodic picaresque, where you just have one thing happen, like an old TV episode where one thing happens, you can read them out of order, you can do all those other things. To me, those are, like I said, I don't ever run out of ideas, and to string together a 100-page story as 5, or 110-page story, since we're 22 pages, as 5 22-page chapters that you then have to wait. You also have to make them a month apart for the monthly readers and stuff like that. That's hard, and hard isn't bad. But I said, maybe it'd be more fun to kind of go into the single issues. So the answer is, at least for the first, 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 issues, you're going to get a little bit of both. You definitely have a self-contained story and a few standalone stories that are going to be following right after that. And then we'll see long term. I'm hoping that I get to do kind of like the old TV show, where it's just 22 pages, one adventure, and then the next month is something different, and the next month is something different after that. But we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes together. I like to have gotten so many, and Moon Girl was, only a handful of kind of standalone issues. Those were always arcs. That being said, because I got so many issues of it, you could do all the kind of different things, and not just like, oh, here's a new character, or here's a new villain, or here's something else. It's just like, okay, this one takes place in the winter, and this one takes place in the fall. This, you know what I mean? So you can kind of like do the different seasons and kind of keep it visually. I like Halloween themed issues. I like holiday, Christmas, or whatever themed issues and stuff. Like, hopefully the book will have, DuckTales have that kind of legs, and we'll get to do a little bit of both. And you save, kind of like in the golden age, you save the big 2-parter for a huge special, you know what I'm saying? And other than that, they kind of stand alone.
Which do you think that kids respond better, like, to that kind of more episodic format? Did you respond better to it when you were younger?
No, I didn't, because it's funny, because I have 2 daughters. They're 15 and 8 now, so they're kind of far apart from each other. Both of them really can sit down and read a big, and I think they enjoy it more. But the 8-year-old's still a little bit young, obviously. But her older sister, my older daughter, even at a young age, would kind of sit down and read a YA, not a YA, I guess a mid-grade novel or whatever it is, a kid's novel length, and really be engaged. I wasn't that way when I was a little kid. Like, I had a short attention span, I suppose, or something like that. And so there's very few long form written entertainment, whether they're books or comics, that I can kind of remember. Because, everything I liked was, if it was on TV, it was just a half hour and you're done with it, whether it was a sitcom or a cartoon. I mentioned Conan. Savage Sword of Conan was kind of just, it was the same thing every month, but there wasn't the same story. No, all due respect to Roy Thomas, and by the time I was reading, it was Ernie Chan it wasn't John Buscema anymore. Yeah, certainly Gru had a couple of two-parters or things that went together, but those were all standalone. So yeah, for me, I would not. I would have liked them to be kind of one and done. I think I might have lost interest or attention for something like that. What do you think?
Based on what I see from my children, because they're younger, they're the 7, 4, and almost 2. So only the
Mhm.
oldest one is really starting to engage
Oh, I
with
see.
comics
Right,
at
right, right.
this point. She's getting into it, and I find that she's like me in the sense that she can jump in anywhere. It's not like if there's interconnecting things going on, she's just going to kind of push those to the side and
Mhm.
focus more on whatever the story
Mhm.
is at the moment. And then if that thread comes back, it's like, oh, that thing came back. But it wasn't, the
Right,
focus is definitely not on the following the little behind the scenes like B plot that becomes the A plot
right.
eventually. So
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
I'm not sure because I
You're
also feel
right
like
because
every kid's different, you know?
yeah, it's fun that you say that because I'm sure there's plenty of Marvel Avengers or Iron Man or something that I read when I was a kid, and I like you're saying, I just ignored whatever I didn't understand. You know, it was kind of cool to see. They used to do it every now when they do it now. I always think it's kind of like a throwback. But you remember, like the editors know, like, oh, see issue 45 when they're kind of like
Yes.
referring to something. You know what I'm saying? Like and that when I was a kid, comics, at least for me, like collecting was so tantalizing. You know what I mean? Like, oh, like you know, obviously I was never gonna have an Action Comics #1, but to have like, oh, these are rare issues or these are expensive issues, that was kind of maybe part of the fantasy, I suppose, when you read stuff. And because even you'd flip through and you'd see you know, advertisements for Mile High
Mhm.
Comics or whatever things for back issues and things like that. So maybe you know, that was kind of how I was aware of continuity. But yeah, it never slowed me down when I read it. And I think that's a good part. You know, it's evidencing a very good lesson that editors and writers and all kind of creators should understand is that you know, have faith in your audience, that you don't need to over explain it. I've worked with obviously some great people. Like you mentioned Frank Miller, he's an artist and he's a writer, so what I'm about to say doesn't apply to him. But a lot of artists who wanted to start writing, or even if I haven't worked with them, I'm friends with them
Mhm.
because, you know, a peer. I see a lot of artists when they start to write, they overwrite. You know, it's like
Mhm.
they have to say, well, I'm an artist, not a writer, so let me really establish what's going on. And what would be cool is to have them unfettered by a writer's kind of story, and just kind of, they should be creating stories that are just visually interesting and spectacular, and saying, oh, I can do all this cool looking stuff. Like in a way, not that the Images 90s stuff is always so great to read, but at least it kind of set it up for the pages that they wanted to draw. You know what I mean? There's something to it nowadays, maybe, and not all artists, obviously, but when they're given their chance to do their own thing, start to write too much because they think they need to explain everything to the reader. When I don't care if it's a kid or somebody your age or somebody my age or somebody older than all of us, they get it. It just goes right. You know, you just read it, and even if something doesn't make sense or whatever, they don't
Mhm.
stop and think about it and pull it apart. They just read the next panel and go on. You know.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's interesting that you say that the continuity maybe doesn't, you know, if it's too much for a young reader or any disinterested party, it doesn't really slow them down. They get 80% of it, and maybe that's enough. I don't know. It's interesting.
It's like if they're invested in the story, they'll keep going. That's what it comes down to, is whether the story has engaged them or not. And that's one of the things I love about, like, you know, these like updates of DuckTales and the like, is that it allows kids this entry point, and especially as a parent, then getting to go through that with them, it reminds you of the ways, at least it does for me, of the ways it was to engage with those things. Because like the older you get, the further you get
Yeah.
away from how you used to engage with things as a child. And so just to be able to witness that and just see that kind of pure enjoyment is just something that I get enjoyment out of that. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, look at how much they're enjoying this.
Yeah, yeah. So when I, you know, when I started working at DC, it was in the bad office, and then I went to Vertigo. I was only there for like 4.5 years, and I was, like I said, I was an associate, assistant editor, associate editor, the junior man on the editorial team, anyway. But I wonder if, you know, I always, I'm very grateful and super appreciative working in kid stuff and all ages stuff, because I think it's
Mhm.
actually really cool. But before I tell you why, I'll say that another part of me says, well, if my first gig that made a difference wasn't Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, but was Spider-Man, right, or Batman. Would I not say what I'm about to say? So I'm putting that out because maybe it's not my opportunity. Maybe I'm biased or blind, or these are the opportunities that came to me, and somehow I'm convincing myself it's better to be working on DuckTales than it is to be working on Wolverine. You know, me being a kid who loved Wolverine and all that other stuff, or working in Vertigo on some great books, or working on All-Star Superman, which is one of the greatest books of all time. I phrase it this way sometimes, which is as much as, you know, I was 30, maybe, you know, it's 30 something, or now, you know, in 40s, Brandon loves All-Star Superman and thinks it's a great book. And it is a great book. It doesn't even come close to how much 12-year-old Brandon loved West Coast Avengers. you know what I mean? Or like I said, to take nothing away from West Coast Avengers, that's or Rom Space Knight, or any of the goofy, or Alien Legion, or any of the goofy books that barely anybody remembers. Kids like that stuff so much. It's so important to them. You know what I mean? Like how important Star Wars was to me, or Star Wars figures, or comic books, or anything like that. It's something nice that, you know, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur fans who are that age are going to grow up. And I don't know, you know, they can listen to, they can read Shakespeare, or they can listen to Beethoven. And I don't know that they're going to appreciate it as much as the kid version of themselves, like Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And that's like a nice place to be in creatively, you know, to be that kind of, you know, just to be a part of something that means so much to people because they're that age. And I think there's some merit to what I'm saying, at least in this business, because we're all in this business because of stuff that we watched and read when we were 12 years old. You know, it's not like, you know, with few exceptions, it's changing. But, and I don't know what I said when you got into comics, but as far as professionals working in comics, and again, it used to be 100%, and now it's still got to be 75, 80, 90%, who knows. We're fans first of comics before getting into it. So I don't know how long you've been a fan or a reader of comics, Sasha.
I started a bit later. I was a fan of the characters first because I came to them through the cartoons. And like when I was younger, it was all like the Spider-Man 90s cartoon, the Batman 90s cartoon, all of those things.
Right.
And so I knew the characters existed, and my dad had some comics lying around. And so I like picked them up, but they hadn't clicked. It kind of clicked for me in university when I was waiting around for the bus, and there was a bookstore, and it was actually Batman Hush. And I saw it on the shelf, and I was like, I know all of these, like I know most of these characters, and like this book and the art looks really cool. And I picked it up and I read through it. And at that time, I didn't know the intricacies of like, this is the second Huntress and like all of those things that like I went and ended up searching for later. But there was just something about it that caught me, and I stuck with it.
Do you think that you having that familiarity was like necessary? Do you think if you didn't watch all these things, I mean, maybe it was necessary for you to pick up that, if somebody forced you, said, sit down and read Hush, do you think you would have enjoyed it as much without it kind of triggering the memories of the 90s cartoons? You know what I mean?
I think for me personally, I think it was necessary because I don't know if I would have looked at it without it. Like, I'm not sure if not having that awareness of who those characters were, if I would have just wandered in on my own, especially because I wasn't in circles where other people really read comics so much. It was only after like getting into it that I branched out and then found people who did. So I think there's definitely an interplay that goes on between the adaptations and the comics. And I think that as time goes on and the technology evolves and those things change, that's only going to get more and more complex.
It's interesting because, you know, even Mark Miller, who, you know, I know you had on not too long ago, he used to like talk about the 8-year cycles and that things would come in and come out. You know what I mean? I worked at a comic shop and did that, like, you know, I was working conventions when I was just a little kid, and I've kind of, you know, comic book selling was so much of my life for so long. I kind of remember Star Wars becoming huge. Like, it was always like Star Trek, but I was a Star Wars fan. But Star Trek conventions, you kind of that cliche that you might even, you know, remember from a couple of decades ago. I saw Star Wars take over in kind of like in comic shops and conventions, and kind of what you would now call geek space, or whatever term you want to put on it. And I think it's because it was the people who grew up on Star Wars started getting older and started, you know what I mean, and started being able to buy that old stuff, or maybe they started working for You know, whatever it was before Disney, was it 20th Century Fox, whatever owned the Star Wars stuff. And you got to see more and more of that stuff, and it endured. And so Mark Miller used to talk about like the 8-year cycles, that you can only really be a professional for 8 years. And he certainly made it last for more than 8 years. But that's kind of like an old cliche, like, oh, Westerns come out and then they go away and then they come back and then they go away and come back. Marvel, and it's primarily Marvel, the movies, but it's everything. It has become such a juggernaut for so long that literally people like, you know, like so when was X-Men and Spider-Man? 2000, something like that? You know what I mean? So if you're 30 years old or older, your entire, I mean, or younger, I should say, your entire life has been Marvel, you know what I mean? And Marvel movies. And, you know, and you can't escape it. So did Marvel somehow beat this 8-year cycle where comics, as dominant as they are now, and you get an old guy like Steven Spielberg? I mean, you know, we all wish we had the audience and could connect with our audience like Steven Spielberg can. But, you know, I call him an old guy because it's kind of a fuddy-duddy attitude where it's like, oh, you know, these Marvel movies will go away one day. It's like, I don't know. They've been so ingrained that when will superhero movies ever go, even if they're not the number one thing, they're not going to be like Westerns where they're not made anymore, because they just dominated for too long. Does that make any sense? You know what I mean? It's like you have people who are now 30 years old, and the number one movie every summer and the number one, you know, the top box office draws every year have been Marvel movies for their entire lives. And if they're into movies and into film, even if they branch off into more serious stuff like, you know, drama, or they, you know, or they go in another direction into more hardcore genre like horror or something like that. How can any filmmaker not be hugely influenced by Marvel movies if they are, like I said, 30 or younger at this point? And if they're going to be running things in the next 5 or 10 years, you know, I don't see superhero stuff being anything except like the number one kind of well, it's been that now, so I guess it wouldn't even change. It's just the idea that it'll never change. It'll never be, and never say never, I guess, but it'll never be like, oh, you know, spy movies or Godzilla movies or monster movies, or all those things have successes, but they don't dominate like comics do. So I guess if you're in the comics business, you know, at least for the next couple of decades, you should be all right.
It's interesting because things can enter into that iconic. Things can enter into iconic status, but of course, as with anything, when something becomes dominant, you'll have things that rise to push against it. The people who will come up and be like, "Ugh, this is everywhere," and so then they'll create other things. Right. So it's going to be very interesting to see that push and pull. But you enter into territory, I think, with certain things where they'll always cycle. And that's why I think you still see things like DuckTales having resurgences and having these generational fandoms that will continue, because there are going to be people who can come to it from the 80s, from the 2000s, from the series, from the comics. So there's a lot out there. And I think that people are going to be really excited to pick it up and look at it. And I hope that it has a big response. I've gotten the chance to look at it, and I think it's a lot of fun. And I think a lot of other people will too. And I wanted to thank you for taking some time to come on and discuss it, and a whole host of other things. I'm glad we got our internet sorted and it all worked out. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah, I definitely appreciate the patience with the internet stuff. And thank you so much for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
So everybody should go and check it out, and I'll put links and all that good stuff down below.
Thank you again. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much to everyone who made it to the end, and for Brandon for stopping by to discuss DuckTales and much more. We did have some internet struggles, but through the magic of editing, hopefully they won't be too obvious. Will you be checking out DuckTales? Share all your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll be back with more videos again soon. Bye-bye.